Well, today on the show, it's the very first time we've ever had a male co-host.
I'm Matt, and I'm excited to be here, Mel. Hope you can handle it.
I hope so, too. But what I'm really looking forward to, aside from you, Matt, is to hearing from our pastors panel on church, faith, and religion.
And I'm looking forward to finding out and discussing why 64% of young adults are leaving the church.
Wow, I can't wait for this discussion. That's next on See, Hear, Love.
You are seen, you are heard, you are loved by God. You're not alone, you're fully known, you are loved by God.
Well, welcome to the show, and it's going to be a good one because this is part one of our series called Love Jesus, but Not the Church. I think that's a really spicy topic today, and I'm so thrilled that we have a full pastors panel here today on See, Hear, Love. Welcome, Danielle, Lucas, Karmyn, and Matt.
Thanks
so much.
And our first ever male co-host, Matt. Are you feeling pressure?
A little bit.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put that on you right at the start of things. I know.
The more you ask me, the more pressure I feel.
Okay, I won't ask you anymore. But let's do a quick little intros on your pastoral experience so that we get a sense of where you're coming from as we start delving into this topic. Danielle.
Sure. So I've been 25 years in ministry, rural churches to urban, inner city, sort of incarnational, and then some social justice stuff. So different countries. It would take a lot more than a couple minutes. Yeah.
So just a few years.
Yeah,
Just
that's
a few
right.
years. And you started when you were like
Obviously like two or something.
I'd say two. Exactly. Okay. Welcome.
Thanks.
Lucas.
Well, myself, I came actually from Brazil like 5 years ago. I've been like in ministry for 10 years. So in Brazil, I was from São Paulo, like actually a city nearby, big church. But then like God called me and my wife to come here 5 years ago, and it's been a wild journey.
Wow. And your church was like 10,000 people, right?
Yeah.
So?
The church in Brazil, yes.
That is a big church. Well, I'm glad you're here in Canada, and I'm glad you're here to share your thoughts too.
Yes.
All right, Karmyn.
Yeah, I have been in, I guess, ministry where I get a paycheck for it for 12 years.
Okay.
In a variety of roles, youth pastoring for a good number of those, associate pastoring, and I currently am the lead pastor at a church locally here.
Okay, that's good. Welcome. Thanks. Matt.
Yeah, planted a church 5 years ago out of our living room with a bunch of friends and help oversee a church planting network. So that's kind of what keeps me busy.
Okay, so we have a lot of expertise here, so this is great. And I want to start off with our news and views today because this actually ties into our topic today. So here's the news and views. So from the Barna Research Group, currently they're saying 64% of young people, North America focus, with a Christian background, which is 3 out of 5, are leaving the church permanently. So combined, we have 12 kids. I think I counted that right. So combined, we have 12 kids. If that statistic is right, that 7.5 of our kids will be leaving the church after the age of 15. How do you feel about that?
I get it.
Yeah.
Like, I think I have two parts of me. One part is like, that's tragic and horrible and don't let that be the case. And the other part is like, I totally get it. I think the problem is not, and this is often a reaction to a survey like this, like a 10-year decade study, is sort of to go, well, those kids are.
Right.
It actually, I think it's evidence of a problem that we even can separate Jesus from the church. I think that the idea that God's people, that Jesus looks like a body on earth, and we've kind of taken church, much like the Romans did, like this institution, building-based, inside the walls.
Yeah.
You know, that's a church problem. That's not a generational problem. And the fact that that exists, I'm not actually even that sad if that's what they're leaving.
Oh,
I think that's
a good point.
fantastic, because every movement in history is the movement out of institutionalized church and into a vibrant spiritual journey. So
you're just reframing. Like I'm like everybody's like, oh no, leaving the church. But you're saying, well, if it's the institution,
great, let's
Yeah, maybe
leave
they're
that.
rejecting the right thing.
Yeah, let's
Maybe
leave
they're
that
onto
right.
something
I
there.
want to leave that. I want to leave that right away. Like
Wow.
if I think church is defined by a building,
Right.
then I don't want to be part of that.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I know.
And I think bouncing off of that, there's a tendency to hear a stat like that and think, okay, well then what I need to do as a parent is hold on tighter and do the things that I know from my growing up experience, from my church experience, and just do more of that. And I think what we need to take from a statistic like that is to pay attention, open our hands a little bit and say, okay, how do we do things differently so that we're actually inviting our kids and the next generation into Jesus, not this institution. And I think that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that's the point. Like even with Danielle, what you were saying before, I think like leaving the church, the institution, not a problem. But I think like realizing that we are the body of Christ and the head of the body is Jesus Christ himself. So I think, okay, yeah, institution, But we gotta have like these kids, these youth, young adults actually plugged in with Jesus Christ, like connected, having an experience with Him.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, I'm not freaked out if my kids are honest and feel comfortable enough to say, I'm not sure about it. Whereas I grew up in an environment I felt like I couldn't be honest about that. So if kids are vocalizing that, sharing that, trying to figure it all out, I feel okay. Like I think God's in all that as they're wrestling and learning and meeting them in those places of asking questions, why this way, why that way?
I can understand the angst though. Like me growing up, church was the epicenter of everything. Everything revolved around the church. Not my home necessarily, yes, but it was like church. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday Bible study, prayer meetings, like everything was church. So for people looking at these statistics, other people, they're like, but that's the bedrock of like our family and of our nation and community. And so that's why I think there's been a bit of a freak out going, Mel, like that's 7 of your kids on the panel are leaving.
It's a revealing of not just a problem, definitely a problem, but also in that problem is an opportunity. And it's whether or not we're going to just see it as a problem that needs to be solved and covered back up, or whether we're willing to actually go all the way down the hole and create the solutions necessary in this opportunity.
Yeah, that's good. Really, really great thoughts. I think there's going to be a lot more to say coming up in the show.
Earlier, Mel had the chance to sit down with David Kinnaman, the president of the Barna Research Group, to talk about this very thing, why young adults are leaving the church. That's coming up next.
When you're kind of just following rules and you're not really experiencing the goodness of God for yourself, it becomes easier to get distracted by like things of the world.
I think they see their parents or their grandparents or people that they've known growing up in the church that say one thing and then act the other way.
We're so focused on religion instead of like relationship. We're teaching more law, like you have to follow these rules. We're not really teaching about like grace in some churches.
A lot of them see a lot of judgment within the church. They think that, if I'm this way, if I don't understand this, I can't ask a question. They feel judged for asking questions and not knowing so much.
It really resembles a classroom, and after going from 8 to 3 for classes, typically you don't want to go and sit in another format of that. It is very much let me teach you rather than like let us all learn together.
David, thank you so much for being with me today here on See, Hear, Love and in front of a live studio audience. How does this feel?
It feels great.
Yeah? So, David, you did a survey for 5 years with young adults ages 18 to 29 and asked them why they're disconnecting from church. You found that 3 out of 5 are disconnecting from church permanently. And here's why, because you have 6 reasons. So reason number 1, you found that young people were leaving the church because churches seem overprotective. And you say that here it says 23% of them say Christians demonize everything outside of the church, and 22% say church is ignoring the problems of the real world.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the people we interviewed for this said that at her church meetings they had to eat angeled eggs rather than deviled eggs.
And probably not like a potluck, but a pot blessing.
Right. Yeah. So, there's all, and so this is a generation that feels like they're living sort of in but not of. They've got one foot in the church, one foot in culture. They're viewed by their culture, their peers, as crazy for believing this stuff. They're viewed by the church as too liberal, too worldly, too whatever. And so they feel stuck. And that perception of being overprotective is like, oh, come on, the real world, it's like we're not going to be undone in our faith by eating deviled eggs.
Right.
So.
But I think, too, here you're saying, that these young adults are saying that Christianity feels stifling, fear-based, and risk-averse, which, I can understand that when you're talking about things like we're dealing with deviled eggs and angel eggs, right?
Yeah, when in the real world we're dealing with divorce and depression.
Well, exactly,
and
exactly.
And, terrorism and gun violence in the States. There's so many different pressures. And this generation's like, that's the real world.
Exactly.
We want to see our faith alive and active in that world.
And I'm seeing here, and I've talked to some other young people who said, church ignoring the problems of the real world means, the church isn't dealing with things like LGBTQ plus, issues. We're seeing homophobia in the church, misogyny, racism, lack of care for the environment, which is a big issue for young people, women's rights, women in leadership in the church. It's like it's not connecting from outside of the church. They're working through this, dealing with these things, seeing women in leadership and people advocating for equal rights. And in the church, it's a problem?
Well, there's so many different layers of the criticisms, and again, it would be an interesting conversation even about how I insulate myself as a researcher to hear the criticisms and to stay hopeful.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a bit of a side note, but I mean, I have to focus on my own time in Scripture, my own church community, my own relational community, my own friendship. I mean, getting counseling and therapy and talking about, because I'm sort of like the Geiger counter. Our team is like the Geiger counter for all the challenging conversations that this generation and others are having about faith. And this is the thing, that Jesus and his hope in us actually helps us to address those very complicated questions. And that's my hope in the church, is that it could actually lean into these kind of skeptical questions that this generation is raising. But they are asking that and more. Race, gender, sexuality, environment, sort of global affairs, vocational issues, parenting, genetics, just the world of science and technology. It's an incredible time to be alive, but this generation is sort of feeling like the church is sort of putting them in a small box, when in fact Christianity should make us more alive to those realities.
And brave and courageous to discuss these without feeling like loss of control, or that we might not have the answers, so what are they going to think of us, right?
Yeah,
and I think we're going to get into that as well. Okay, reason number 2, teens and 20-somethings experience of Christianity is shallow. 31% say church is boring, and 24% say faith is not relevant to my career or interests.
Yeah, this was a huge one for us. That almost like 3 out of 4 young people who graduate from a sort of a Christian experience, graduate on from primary school on to secondary or higher education, say they have no idea how the Bible might apply to their career or field of interest. They grew up as a Christian, but they're not vocationally discipled, and so the church is very shallow when it comes to their career. Is a good example of that.
That's really key. I think that it's not relevant to my career interests. I think in part 2 we're going to talk about how the church can be involved.
Yeah, how it's stepping into
it. Yeah. Reason number 5, but I want to get through these. Young adults are leaving the church because they wrestle with the exclusive nature of Christianity. They have been shaped by a culture that esteems open-mindedness, tolerance, and acceptance, and they feel that churches are afraid of others' beliefs, and that church is like a country club only for insiders. Wow, that's big.
There's a lot of different dimensions there, but the idea that they live in a world that's pluralistic, they don't understand why the exclusive claims of Christianity might make sense in a world where, like God loves all people. Why he's a God of love, but so why would he, want to condemn anyone to hell? So they wrestle a lot with those questions of human suffering, of sort of the exclusive claims of Christianity, that you have to become a Christ follower in order to go to heaven.
Okay. Wow, these are some really big reasons, but it's amazing that young adults are thoughtfully thinking through these and able to articulate, like, these are some of the things that we struggle with. That's why we're leaving.
And you can see why sometimes as a researcher I go home in a fetal position.
David. And you're like, oh man.
No, it's a hard work.
It is.
It's a true calling to try to listen and understand these criticisms,
well,
and understand sometimes they're true and sometimes they're almost true.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're doing it. Finally, reason number 6, last one. That young adults are leaving the church, they say, because the church feels unfriendly to those who doubt. That 36% said they feel that they are unable to ask my most pressing life questions at church, and that the church is not dealing also with mental health issues.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we've been talking about, all the doubts across each of these 5 areas. Science, depression, sexuality, can we be honest with ourselves and with others? And the church should not be a place that's doubtless. It should be doubt-filled, because that actually propels us toward God.
That's good, David. Okay, just summing this up, David, what would your encouragement to be to young adults thinking about leaving the church or their faith? What would you say to them?
I think even some of the work that we do in listening to others, it's interesting how sometimes our criticisms become bigger than our ability to hear what God is saying to us. I truly, deeply believe there is a God who speaks to us and wants to call him to himself. And so to those that are struggling with the kinds of questions we've talked about, or those that we haven't had a chance to talk about, I think that God hears you. I mean, the person who's created you understands the nature of doubt. He created us to have these big questions because they enlarge our hearts and allow for us to see the world as it is. So, to lean into those questions, but to realize that there's a person who created you to be with the ability to ask those questions in the first place and who loves you despite those things.
And to the Gen Xer and the Boomer who are leading young adults in churches, ministry, and organizations, what would you say to them?
Well, this is a generation that's growing up in a truly different context, and it frustrates me to no end when people say, hey, there's nothing new under the sun. There's the same things we saw in the 1960s. And, of course, there was a complicated time then, but this generation is today facing unprecedented challenges in the digital age. And so we have to be courageous to meet them where they're at, in their questions, in their doubts, in their reasons for walking away.
Good. Well, I'm so glad there's a part 2 to this, because we just sort of felt this sense of like, here are all the reasons young adults are leaving. But in part 2, we're going to look at how the church, how myself, how leaders can help bring young adults back into the church or stay in the church and build a resilient faith. So thank you, David Kinnaman, so much for your time and your thoughts and your research here today on See Hear Love.
Of course, my pleasure.
Check out the See Hear Love podcast and get the backstory.
Good job!
Get the inside scoop on real issues and real answers on common challenges we all face in relationships and in life. Find See Hear Love on Apple Podcasts.
Well, great interview, Mel.
Thanks,
Man,
not bad, eh?
So many things, like all the stats, all the information, so many things to chat about. Let's jump into the first one right away. Lucas, going to start with you.
Of course.
So the first reason, the church seems overprotective, ignoring real world problems, not addressing them. What do you think?
Wow, that's a big one, and I think like even we gotta learn with the past, and even ourselves, like the church, like just going to the Bible. When we see, even for example in the book, he mentions a lot about Daniel. So over there, like we saw that many prophets before, like with the generation of Daniel, they were declaring that, oh no, you're not supposed to mingle with the people of Babylon. But this was not the solution. The prophet Jeremiah, he came and said like, no, you gotta mingle with them. And I think if nowadays we're just like in the same position where we say, no, let's protect ourselves and no, let's not look for the world, we're going to be dead. Because we're supposed to be lights for the world. So it's big one.
Do you really think, that actually, it hurts me that they feel that we're ignoring real world problems, but maybe we are. Like, are we really missing the mark on actual social issues and issues that matter to them?
I think it's really interesting that you brought up Daniel, because he's a prophet that lived in Israel captivity, in Babylonian captivity. And so I think that in the church, I feel like the felt fear is compromise. We feel like we're going to be compromised if we mingle with Babylon. So there is like this whole, like, you're protecting us from, you're exclusionary, you're like safe, you're protecting, use this bubble land, and we don't want you to go outside of this bubble. Is this fear that is based on we don't want to be compromised by the world. It's a defensive posture. And I'm always shocked by it. I've been shocked by it my whole life, because I do think it's the opposite posture of Christ and the early church, even, and Daniel, even, who took a Babylonian name, who like served a Babylonian king, who had Babylonian friends, who and drew a line, learned how to draw a line in his culture that would bring the light of God into that darkness, into that culture. So I feel like we've done such a disservice by doing this like protective, nobody puts blinds up to protect themselves from the darkness. You ever think about that? Yeah. Nobody puts up blinds to protect themselves from the darkness. So light, that's what we put blinds up to protect ourselves from, because it's so much more powerful than the darkness. So I just actually resonate with the study to say, what are we so afraid of? Light isn't afraid of the dark. I mean, this is Jesus said, put me in the darkest spot, it won't extinguish the light. There's no way to snuff this out. So when did fear become a dominant view?
And Danielle, that works what they say the church feels stifling, fear-based, and risk-adverse.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly what you're saying.
I think even as I reflect back on my own upbringing and as I now work in church ministry, I'd love to know who got to be the one that created the answer to the be in the world but not of the world. Because so often I think that's something that we hold on to, and I think it's actually, we've created an answer that's been driven by fear. And as leaders in the church and as parents and as people who step into life and faith communities, have we actually paused to say, Jesus, what do you actually mean when you say to be in the world and not of the world? And do we trust you enough to step deeper into what culture and the context we find ourselves in? And again, open our hands a little bit more. And I think we have done the disservice, and I think we find ourselves in a space where we have become risk averse, a bit fear-based, and totally blind to what's going on in our culture, because often, and I think even of my own upbringing, it was quoted like, we'll be in the world but not of the world. But our solution to that, or our answer to that, has been, well, let's just just come all in then and shut the doors. And I think we have some good, hard discerning work to do to say, what does that actually look like? Trusting and following the step of the Spirit and following Jesus in that.
That's good.
I think that's the point. Like just to comment, like something that you said. Once we shut the doors, we are actually powerless, because the power like should be manifested like outside, not inside. Like it's not simply for us just to keep for ourselves. Otherwise, and that's a point like for the young adults to leave the church or to feel like, oh, it is so overprotective, because we're just like in this bubble. Then now I don't see the power in this bubble.
Yeah.
There's no reason for me to stay here.
Yeah, it's good. Matt, reason 2, Christianity is shallow. So it's boring, the Bible's not taught clearly, and God seems missing from my experience. What are your thoughts about that reason? It's shallow. We're shallow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that doesn't feel that surprising to me or that new to me. Like I remember growing up in the church and then feeling like some of those things were the same. I've said the exact same thing. I would have felt like, man, what is going on here? We can't really ask real questions because it feels like it's destabilizing our foundation by bringing it up, and why are we doing the things that we're doing? It feels like we're just going through these motions. They're not, I understand when young people are saying, like, show us something that's really making a difference.
Yeah.
Instead of like, are we just doing this for ourselves? Are we shutting it in, digging a trench, like, and allowing ourselves just to be protected, and because we're all afraid of it? So the idea that it's boring or not relevant, I feel like I would have said that too, and sometimes that's my critique of what I'm doing too, like trying to figure it out.
What I find fascinating and boring is that we spend a lot of money and time creating big youth experiences that are exciting, huge worship things, lots of activities, adventure camps, and all these kinds of things, and yet they're still saying church, the experience, is boring. So I wonder if, maybe we're focusing on the wrong things. Like we're putting all of our time and money to create unboring experiences, but they're at the end of it going, well, actually, I want to know Jesus more, and you're creating this. I don't know, something to think about for that.
Just the shift to say, I want to feel God, I want to encounter God, like I want to feel something, and then they're becoming believers. So this is a really interesting idea of a return, I think, almost to like a Jesus era, where Jesus never asked anyone to subscribe to a set of beliefs before he prayed for them or healed them or offered them inclusion or empowerment or choices. It was sort of through that they became believers in Christ. So I feel like there's actually this encounter is another really good opportunity.
I love that.
Yeah. Reason 5, young adults wrestle with the exclusive nature of Christianity. So here they are in an open-minded culture, tolerant and accepting of all people. And their struggle and tension is that it's like an exclusive club where you have to make that decision, that Jesus is, Son of God, and that's it. And that's the only way you're going to get to heaven. That's a big one, because that's part of what, we're about. So let's talk about that, because this is one I think that can really speak to churches and young people. Karmyn, you're like, I know. You're like, don't ask me.
Here's what I think. At the risk of sounding heretical, we've made it all about the one decision you need to make to check off a box. And we have, the sad part is that is very true. That is very central to our faith, to claim who Jesus is. But have we totally skimmed over the richness and reality of what it means to be in a deep, authentic relationship with Jesus? And when we invite people to look at that, study that, engage with that, what they see as they learn Jesus is he was the least exclusive guy out there. He was the one pushing the boundary of what it meant to be exclusive and reaching to the margins and inviting people in who would have been excluded. And so when we invite people in to say, what does it actually look like to follow Jesus? We see an example and a model set before us that is far from exclusive.
Which is so good, because when someone has that encounter, that experience, that change, then feeling like I'm for Jesus feels like a natural next step. Right. But apart from the experience or the personal transformation understanding, it feels like, well, why would I ever become exclusive? Like, why would I do that? Because it's like just kind of floating out there until it's rooted in this encounter, experience, change that happens for them personally.
Reason number 6 is the church feels unfriendly to those who doubt. It's a big one. I think that says a lot to young people who are saying the church is not a safe place for my doubts or my questions about Jesus and faith. What would you say as we end sort of those reasons? Lucas, what would you say about that?
I think it's a clash of generations. Like my parents before, they were taught that for you to honor, you're not supposed to raise questions. And I think like our generation is quite the opposite. Like we are, okay, I honor you, but I have doubts, and how can I come like in a safe place where I can share my doubts? And if we don't open like this safe zone where they are able to come and share their thoughts, questions, doubts, whatever they're thinking, we're not going to get them.
Yeah.
We've also been taught that doubt is the opposite of faith, which is a really bad theology. Because faith is this unseen, unknown. So doubting is a part of figuring all of faith out. So the fact that we made those opposites has been a disservice to the church and to generations, really.
Guys, such great thoughts. I know we're going to continue some conversation in our after the show thoughts. And a lot of the content in our conversation is going to end up on our See Her Love YouTube. So I really appreciate it. We could be here for hours talking more about this. But now let's go to Joanna, who is going to share from the Good Word of some encouragement to young adults as they struggle through their faith and church journey. Let's go to Jo.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks to the panel. This is such an important conversation. I love what David Kinnaman and the Barna Group's research has done for us to give us insight into this. It reminds me of this text in Hebrews chapter 10, where it's talking about what to do as a result of who God is, what Jesus has done for us. And particularly at verse 25, it talks about don't do like others have done and avoid getting together in worship. It says, don't avoid worshiping together as some do, but spur each other on, especially as we say the big day approaching, the day of Jesus' return. I know for myself and for others who have wrestled with faith, who have wondered if they want to stay in the church, the most important thing to do is actually stay in Christian community. Just as the scripture says, don't give up meeting together. If you're a young person who's struggling and wrestling, wondering if this Christian life is for you, keep meeting with other young Christians. Struggle together, worship together, be in the scriptures together and wrestle it through. Now, if you're an older person who is looking at this pattern of behavior happening in young people in your church community, I encourage you to create space for them to come and meet together, not give up meeting together. Meet with them, but also just facilitate a space for them to meet with one another. It's so critical for the growth and the future of the church that we don't separate ourselves from the body, but actually come together as the body of Christ, not forgetting to meet together. Because Jesus wants to meet with us. He invites us, as it says in Hebrews 10, to come boldly before the throne of God together with all of our angst, with all of our frustration, with all of our struggles, and to bring them honestly before Him. And we can do that in the context of community with one another. That is the way that we're going to see the church grow into the next generation and carry forth into the future. Okay, Mel, back to you.
Thanks, Joanna. Great thoughts from the Good Word. And thank you, Karmyn and Danielle and Lucas and Matt for being here. Really, really inspiring and thoughts that I kind of just sit and think about. There's some good things here to kind of challenge us in the church and in community. You know, me, you, and the church, we have a lot of thoughtful and meaningful, courageous work ahead of us to lead this next generation. We need to choose now to make some course corrections, and it can't be that we did that in the past. It will work in the present. We need to step forward and listen and learn from our young people and then make changes together. That's my takeaway. Yours?
That's good. I mean, when David talked about having hope, I think that's a big thing. There are challenges ahead of us, but I think there's also a lot of things for us to be hopeful about. I think it's a generation that's super passionate and want to be engaged, and they're asking really good questions, and the church needs to consider what they're saying and talk about ways we can shift and move so that we're relevant and it all comes back together. Jesus and the church aren't two separate things anymore.
Good. Matt, that's a great takeaway. Well done, and well done as a co-host today. You did such a great job. Didn't he do a great job?
Fantastic.
You guys did a great job too. It was a great show. Had so much fun. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners who are joining us today. Just want to let you know to watch the full David Kinnaman interview with reasons 3 and 4 that we didn't show today. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and for our blogs and past shows, go to seeherlove.com. And make sure you also subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts to hear the backstory of how this very show and other shows end up as topics and themes for See Hear Love. And as always, as you navigate through your own faith and church journey, know that you are seen and heard and deeply loved by God. Bye-bye.
Melinda's Hair by Paolo Marola. Melinda's Clothing sponsored by Denise Boutiques. Clothes for every woman. ShopDenise.ca.
Deeks Insurance is a proud sponsor of the See Hear Love Studio.